Welcome to the Aaron Harber Show. I'm with the CEO of Global Witness, Gillian Caldwell. Gillian, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Hey, my pleasure. So you've done so many documentaries. You're also establishing the use of video and undercover operations. I was really intrigued by the fact that you were so involved in an undercover operation with the Russian mafia, not on behalf of the Russian mafia, when it came to trafficking and prostitution. What was your role there, and how did that play out?
Well, it's an interesting story, actually. I was a recent law school graduate, and I was working in a small civil rights firm, and a friend asked me out for a beer. He said he had something he wanted to talk about, and he told me that he had been doing an undercover investigation on the trade in Siberian tiger pelts in the Russian Far East, and that they had offered to sell him women, which he found quite surprising. This was 1995, so I guess post-fall of the Berlin Wall, they were diversifying their product line. And he approached me to see if I would be willing to help raise the funds to do a global undercover investigation on the Russian mafia's involvement in trafficking women for forced prostitution. And this was news to me. I started doing a little bit of research after hours, and 2 weeks later showed up at his office, said, "I've quit my job, I'm ready to go." He said, "I can't pay you." And I said, "Well, we'll figure that out along the way." And basically formed a dummy company called International Liaisons, specializing in foreign models, escorts, and entertainers with very appropriate mauve stationery, and posed as people who wanted to import women into the United States for prostitution. And most of the undercover work was actually done by my colleague, who was a man, because we wouldn't have been credible, actually, with the mafia to have a woman in those business negotiations at that stage. But I was very involved in sort of shaping the investigation, in developing the lines of inquiry, in reviewing all of the undercover videotape, and making sure we got what we needed. And it involved discussions not only with Russian mafia throughout Moscow, but also meetings with women inside brothels. Obviously, he never paid for services per se. He paid for time and used it to talk. And these were women who were more than happy to talk about their experience, and many of them were indeed enslaved, essentially, by virtue of how that network works.
And did he use video with them at that point or not?
He was using undercover video the entire time. In fact, the feeling was, obviously, there's safety and security risk involved in an investigation like that, and so there were ethical questions as to whether or not we should be informing the women that we were doing this kind of filming. Our decision was that if they were informed, they would be at greater risk, and that what we should do is anonymize all identities. So none of the women with whom we spoke were identifiable in the context of the completed documentary. It wound up setting the stage for a global advocacy campaign, helped kickstart the Trafficking Victims Protection Act in the United States, a UN transnational organized crime protocol, as well as a grants program that I helped design and administer on behalf of the Soros Foundation to fund groups in Central and Eastern Europe to support women who are caught in the net.
That's extraordinary. What an extraordinary beginning. I mean, just accomplishment. Tell me more about Bought and Sold.
So Bought and Sold was an investigative documentary on the international trade in women, and the point of the program was to give you an insider's view on how the international trade in women actually works. It was intended primarily for education and advocacy, but the material we shot also became the subject of numerous television programs, including an ABC Primetime Live special. And I think it was very effective as a vehicle for educating women and the organizations designed to support them about how this business works. Women are often signing contracts that are illegal and unenforceable. Their passports are confiscated, and they find themselves in indentured servitude or virtual slavery because they may or may not know that they're going to work as prostitutes. In some instances, they're actually misinformed and think they're going to be dancers or waitresses. But in the end, very few people are functioning voluntarily inside that environment. They no longer have access to their passports. They and their families at home are threatened, and those threats are very real given the sort of the extensive network that Russian organized crime has in place and its relationships to other criminal groups such as Yakuza in Japan.
What's the state of human trafficking today? I mean, what you did was quite some time ago, almost, well, over two and a half, almost 3 decades. What's the state today? And what don't people know about human trafficking?
Well, human trafficking is still a big problem. I mean, I think there's a lot more awareness than there was, both in terms of the communities where recruitment is taking place, in terms of law enforcement. I think law enforcement is less likely to sort of re-victimize people caught in trafficking. There's many more laws in place. There's much more support and infrastructure in place, and yet it persists. Trafficking in not just women, but in people is, a global phenomenon. Nobody knows exactly the scope and scale, and it's hard to, because it's all sort of an underground economy, understand whether it's on the rise or on the decline. I think the underlying problem, the driver for this, of course, is, poverty, and people are seeking economic opportunity, and unscrupulous groups are taking advantage of that and beckoning them with calls of a better life, and they want to support their families, and then they find themselves in these exploitative conditions. So you find trafficking and trafficking victims virtually everywhere in the world today.
Okay, I'm going to jump to another documentary, Citizen Koch. Tell me a little bit about that. And I'm curious, did you get a chance to interview the Koch brothers or even ask them for an interview?
Yes, so the producer-director team on that, Tia Lesson and Carl Deal, would actually surely have reached out to the Kochs on several occasions for an interview. Although, if you've seen it, you'll know it's not a Koch biopic per se. Citizen Koch was really about the corrosive force of money in American politics. Charles and David Koch are very emblematic of the force of money in American politics.
My brother Charles and I provided the funds to start the Americans for Prosperity.
Money is a weapon.
I think they've actually been highly strategic in terms of the investments they've made. They've played a long game to build a sort of a base, the far right. They've invested heavily in grassroots organizing on the right, and I think a lot of philanthropists would do well to take a page out of their playbook if they're serious about progressing social and economic justice in this country.
There doesn't seem to be anybody on the left of the large group of billionaires who have taken that page or are anywhere as close to being as strategic as the Kochs. Is that a fair statement today?
I think the Democracy Alliance, of course, is, an organized aggregation of high net worth individuals that are specifically focused on how to invest for the long haul, both in terms of grassroots, in terms of advancing, Democratic candidates and their races. There's Emily's List. I mean, there's a range of infrastructure on the left or on the liberal end of the spectrum, but there's nothing like the scale of resources being invested. And part of that is that, very unfortunately, people who have a lot of money typically want to hold on to it, and the way to hold on to it is to invest in Republican candidates for office, because they do, in general, make rich people richer.
Well, I'm actually kind of, though, fascinated by the fact that you have people with mega wealth, a Michael Bloomberg who's worth whatever, 40 billion, or a Bill Gates who's worth twice that or whatever, or Jeff Bezos who's now worth 3 times that. And you have the Koch brothers where they make a commitment of $100 million or $400 million to have the kind of impact you're talking about. I don't see anybody who has even more wealth than the Koch brothers making that kind of commitment. For someone like Michael Bloomberg to make a $400 million commitment sounds like a lot of money. That's only 1% of his net worth. So I'm kind of fascinated that it seems to me that at least there's some people on the right more than willing to make significant commitments. I don't see that on the left. I see a lot of investments in foundations with, in my opinion, real questionable a rate of efficiency or effectiveness in terms of what they're doing. And certainly it's not effective politically, as the current situation kind of proves.
Yeah. Well, of course, foundations are 501c3, so they're restricted in terms of electoral engagement. George Soros is roundly criticized and with frequency by the right-wing media for his investments in Democratic candidates. He was a big supporter of Hillary Clinton. Bloomberg invested $100 million in a global anti-coal campaign that's been highly successful. I mean, I think they're each of them making their own decisions about their priorities. Of course, Bill Gates is really focused on global health. But I think the point's well taken that virtually, an entire agenda is at risk given the current Congress and administration, whether you're talking about education, healthcare, environmental rights, fundamental civil rights. And irrespective of what your issue area is, this is a place where we should be paying a lot more attention.
Well, I think a lot of the multi-billionaires on the left are too comfortable. And my sense is that they're not willing to take risk. And you gave a great example in Bill Gates. So Bill Gates invests $100 million or whatever it is or more in global health. In the meantime, because of public policies based on politics related, for example, to climate change, the odds are that everything he's doing is going to be washed away by a tsunami of what the impacts of climate change are going to be. So, in my opinion, he's not investing where he's going to have a real impact. He's wasting his money, but he's retaining it, like you said. He's wealthier than he's ever been. I think that's replicated constantly on the left, maybe to some extent on the right too, but certainly the Koch brothers are an exception. So I'm kind of fascinated by the fact that when you look at what's happening politically today, there isn't the checkbook outrage that you would have expected. Because again, I think people are just too comfortable. But that's just my thesis. And they're unwilling to be bold. They're unwilling to take risk. All right, we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back with Gillian in just a moment.
For information on how to help promote civil and mutually respectful discourse and support expansion of the distribution of our programs, please email info@harbortv.com.
Safely stop fires around your home. Introducing the Fire Ice XT 20-ounce aerosol canister. Fire Ice XT is an eco-friendly water-based fire suppressant gel. Unlike a traditional fire extinguisher, Fire Ice XT is a highly effective, non-toxic firefighting agent that is easy and safe to use around your home, family, and pets. Available at Amazon.com or call 800-924-4874.
I'm Aaron Harber, host of The Aaron Harber Show. Find us on Facebook to get all the latest updates, see behind-the-scene photos, and make comments and ask me questions. You can see episodes before their TV broadcast, so like the show today.
Join me and watch The Aaron Harber Show.
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 I'm Reverend Jesse Jackson. Watch The Aaron Harber Show and keep hope alive.
I'm Aaron Harber, host of The Aaron Harber Show. You can follow the show on Twitter for instant notification of new episodes, live event invitations, outtakes, and behind-the-scene photos. And tweet us your topic and guest suggestions today.
The Aaron Harber Show may be viewed 24/7 at no charge from any location in the world at www.harbortv.com.
Welcome back to the show. We are with Gillian Caldwell. So I want to hear about Global Witness because that's your current project. Tell me about it.
So Global Witness is essentially a global detective agency working to identify the corruption, human rights abuses, and environmental degradation associated with the worldwide trade in natural resources. We were the organization that sort of put the conversation about so-called blood diamonds onto the map. We're the organization that has received a TED Prize for our wish to end anonymous companies, which are the vehicles through which entire national economies are defrauded and money is laundered all around the world. And we look at a lot of commodities in the supply chain. We look at precious gemstones, at timber, at rubber. We have a current project on coal, and increasingly we're focusing our energy more and more on climate-relevant natural resources. But our focus is to ensure that there's transparency and appropriate natural resource governance, because all too often countries that are naturally resource-rich are struggling with endemic poverty, and they're also ruled by kleptocrats who are working in cahoots with big business and Western banks.
So what's an example, one or two examples of some of the really extreme corruption that you've come across?
So when we're talking about corruption and related environmental and human rights abuses, we've got plenty of examples. We just released a report on talc mining in Afghanistan, substantiating a suspicion that the Taliban and the Islamic State are funding themselves off the back of talc mining. We recently released another report on Nilepet, which is a state-owned oil company in Sudan, proving that that's basically a completely off-books slush fund and reserve to prop up that regime, and that those funds were critical to the ongoing civil war in South Sudan. In the DRC, we've proved a range of connections between Glencore, Dan Gertler, and mining interests there, once again substantiating concerns that funds that should be going into national treasuries are making their way into the pockets of governing officials and or the businessmen working with them. And I think one of the most strident examples we have, in fact, is that of Shell and Eni, who paid a $1.1 billion bribe for access to an oil block off the coast of Nigeria. Those funds never hit the national treasury. They went into an offshore bank account, lining the pockets of the former oil minister and then President Goodluck Jonathan. And at this stage, Shell and Eni are facing aggravated criminal charges for bribery in Italy, and we do anticipate charges will be filed by at least one other country soon, and we're a prosecution witness in that case.
So you are the ones that, so as Global Witness, that uncovered these transactions. How did you do that, especially in the Shell case, for example, in any case?
So we have, a fantastic team of investigators. They come from a range of backgrounds. Some have backgrounds as journalists, others as policy advocates, and others in law. And we do painstaking, detailed investigations. An average investigation would take a minimum of 1.5 years, perhaps 2 years or more. And at the heart of the investigation is very often a painstaking process whereby we follow the money, because if you follow the money, it takes you where you need to go in terms of understanding the source of these problems. We recently did an expose on the Trump Ocean Club in Panama City and proved that that deal, which was Trump's first overseas licensing deal, has benefited President Trump and his family to the tune of millions of dollars, and that it's a massive money laundering operation for Latin American drug cartels. And so the question is, what did President Trump know and when? And we've provided that information to Mueller for use in his investigation, as well as relevant congressional subcommittees.
And how come, well, I haven't seen any stories on this. Have I missed them or not?
No, there was an hour-long special in Rachel Maddow's slot on NBC with Richard Engel, who's their senior foreign correspondent. Reuters did a massive piece. It was a three-way investigation, NBC, Reuters, and Global Witness. But I think our current president is a story a minute, so nothing seems to stick.
And why do you think that is? And have you ever seen anything like that before?
I don't think we've ever seen anything like this. I think he's a master at distraction. He's a master at shoring up a base and at doing and saying things that will reinforce his support throughout the country. And I think we're in very dangerous times where a lot of core values are under threat.
All right, well, I think you laid it out pretty accurately. We're going to take our last break. We'll be right back in a moment.
For information on how to help promote civil and mutually respectful discourse and support expansion of the distribution of our programs, please email.
The Rexall Broadcaster of the Year Award recognizes an individual who, through leadership, skill, and dedication, is advancing the broadcast industry in our state and our nation. Tonight, we honor Aaron Harber. Aaron has worked extensively in the media as a host, producer, political and economic commentator, and columnist. Today, the Aaron Harber Show is the focus of his media involvement. Aaron, it is a privilege to present you with the Rex Howe Broadcaster of the Year Award. Congratulations.
Just make journalism great again. Journalism great again.
Join me and watch the Aaron Harber Show.
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 I'm Reverend Jesse Jackson. Watch the Aaron Harber Show and keep hope alive.
I'm Aaron Harber, host of the Aaron Harber Show. Find us on Facebook to get all the latest updates, see behind-the-scene photos, and make comments and ask me questions. You can see episodes before their TV broadcast, so like the show today. I'm Aaron Harber, host of the Aaron Harber Show. I very much would like to hear from you about the program, so please send me an email with your thoughts. You can suggest what topics I should cover, what guests I should invite to be on the show, or even what specific questions you would like me to ask. This is your program, so send your suggestions to aaron@harbortv.com. I promise to personally read every one, so email me today. And most of all, thanks for watching. I'm Aaron Harber, host of the Aaron Harber Show. You can follow the show on Twitter for instant notification of new episodes, live event invitations, outtakes, and behind-the-scene photos. And tweet us your topic and guest suggestions today.
The Aaron Harber Show may be viewed 24/7 at no charge from any location in the world at www.harbortv.com.
Welcome back to the show. This is our final segment. Well, I'm really interested, Gillian, in what's happening in terms of the global crackdown, especially on those trying to bring transparency to the public in their countries and around the world.
So what we're witnessing right now is actually a really worrying trend, whereby societies all around the world are becoming increasingly restrictive with respect to the rights and opportunities citizens have to organize. Civicus completes a so-called monitor, an evaluation of countries all around the world, and assesses the degree of openness. And according to its criteria and methodology, only 3% of the people on this planet today live in fully open societies. What we're seeing is an increasing number of laws that are passed that restrict freedom of assembly, freedom of speech, the ability of non-governmental organizations to register or to receive foreign funding, and increasingly violent repression when organizations or individuals oppose business developments that are taking place on their land. We actually produce an annual report on the killings of earth and land rights defenders. And last year, there were 197 people who were assassinated because they were defending their right to be consulted with respect to how their land is developed. And of course, that's a vast underestimate. Those are only the killings we can substantiate. But what we're facing is, I think, quite brutal repression, and oftentimes business colluding directly with government in order to progress sort of profit at any price mentality. And at the same time, you know, there's an encouraging trend, which is that companies are increasingly recognizing that these environmental, social, and governance concerns are material risks and can really have bottom line impacts in terms of you know, the rate at which they're traded, you know, if they're publicly traded company, for example. So at the same time, we have this increase in sensitivity and more standards, which Global Witness is helping to design around supply chain due diligence. We're also seeing, you know, these actors tightening the noose on anybody who opposes them.
Right, and you didn't mention freedom of the press.
Well, yes, that's a huge problem as well. I mean, it's interesting that 4 times as many earth and land rights defenders were killed as journalists in the last year alone, according to the Committee to Protect Journalists statistics. So it's a dangerous business no matter how you look at it. And I think, of course, journalism today needs to be pretty broadly interpreted. It's not just about legacy media. It's increasingly about citizen journalists, especially as media is in a fight for its life and has to rely increasingly on people outside the traditional media purview for information.
What, in that regard, I'm kind of interested in, from a time or chronological perspective, as you assess how different countries are becoming more restrictive or even more respective. How would you chart that over the past, say, 2 decades? Has that been just a gradual, annual incremental process, or have there been spikes or leaps, negative leaps as it were, forward?
I think we've really seen this process escalate pretty substantially in the last decade, and more notably in the last 5 years. I don't have the statistics in front of me, but I think this trend of a global crackdown on civil society, both in terms of new laws being passed and in terms of the behavior of governments towards civil society actors, is definitely becoming an increasingly serious problem. I've been speaking to numerous philanthropists, both on the human rights side and on the environmental side, who are actively trying to determine what approaches they can take to ensure the safety and security of non-governmental organizations that they're supporting. And one of the biggest concerns is that in a recently cited study by a group of philanthropists analyzing more than 120 non-governmental organizations, the most frequently cited restraint on freedom of expression was self-censorship, which, and the second most frequently cited, of course, were violent government repression. It could take the form of charges of terrorism or arrests, arbitrary detainment, things of that nature. But what we're seeing is that people are self-censoring because of the perceived and actual risks of telling the truth in many countries around the world.
Well, certainly in some countries, when you think of a terribly corrupt nation, you think of laws that are passed where you can't even criticize the government, and or if you're even thought of almost thinking about criticizing the government, you can be in trouble. But give me, and I know we only have a few seconds left, but there also are laws, and you reference Western Europe, that can be very restrictive in other senses. Give me one example of those.
Well, like I said, there's laws that make it impossible in some countries to receive foreign funding. In China, for example, where we work, if you want to register as a non-governmental organization inside China, you have to find a government ministry to sponsor you, and all of your annual plans and budgets need to be reviewed and analyzed by that government ministry, which of course is a pretty unprecedented degree of scrutiny, at a global level.
All right. Gillian, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
That was Gillian Caldwell. I'm Aaron Harber. Thanks for watching.
Please contact us. We want to hear from you. And thanks for watching.
I'm Aaron Harber, host of The Aaron Harber Show. I very much would like to hear from you about the program, so please send me an email with your thoughts. You can suggest what topics I should cover, what guests I should invite to be on the show, or even what specific questions you would like me to ask. This is your program, so send your suggestions to aaron@harbortv.com. I promise to personally read every one, so email me today. And most of all, thanks for watching. I'm Aaron Harber, host of The Aaron Harber Show. Find us on Facebook to get all the latest updates, see behind-the-scenes photos, and make comments and ask me questions. You can see episodes before their TV broadcast, so like the show today.